Hi everyone, welcome to Chapter 4. So this week is going to continue on with a few of the topics that we talked about last week. Specifically, your book's going to have you go in and look at all of the different control panel features and different features that Windows 7 has to offer. And I highly encourage you to go around and play with those. But this video is going to focus on three main things. The first of which is going to be continuing our discussion along with Microsoft Management Consoles. We're just going to look a little bit more into what some of the things you can do with it is. Next, we're going to talk about services and what those are. And then finally, we're going to talk about the registry. So first, let's talk about the Microsoft Management Console. So the first thing we're going to want to do is, like you saw last week, is launch the Microsoft Management Console. Again, we can do that by just going to Start and then Search and typing MMC. Now we have one open from last week, timconsole1.msc, which we saved on my desktop last week, and I'm going to edit that. So I'm just going to double click the one we already have open, and I'm going to click yes, and then that's going to bring up the management console that we had set up last week. So the first thing I'm going to do, just as a refresher here, is I'm going to add a few more services, or a few more snap-ins rather. So again, to do that, you'll click File and you'll click Add/Remove Snap-in. Now you can also press Control M on your keyboard to bring the same menu up. So I'm going to just press Control M, brings the Add Remove Snap-in menu. So if we wanted to remove that disk management snap-in that we added later, or excuse me, that we added last week, we can click on it and just click Remove, and that will remove it from this list. But what I want to do is I want to add another snap-in, services, because we're going to talk about services here a little bit later. So we're going to scroll down on the list and we're going to find services. We're going to add it just like we did last week, and we want to manage the services on this local computer. So we're going to click Finish, and then just for giggles here, I'm going to also add the Shared Folders service, or excuse me, Shared Folders Snap-in. We're going to click OK, and you can see here that it's got a few more options. We're just going to select All for now. And then we'll hit OK. And now you can see here we've added two more snap-ins for a total of 3. So we've got disk management, we've got services, and we've got shared folders. So these all let you manage different, or basically these all give you different access to different utilities that you can use in Windows. So we're going to talk about services here in a second, but this snap-in will allow you to manage all of the services that are running on your machine. So let me show you some of the things you can do just as far as working with the Windows 7 Management Console, or the Microsoft Management Console. So let's say we wanted to split this workspace here. I'm going to full screen this first off. Let's say we wanted to split this workspace into a separate workspace for each one of these consoles, or rather snap-ins. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, and then I'm going to select New Window from here. And now you can see here that in the left-hand pane, everything's disappeared. Now you might be asking, well, where the heck did it go, and how do I get back to where I was? Well, if you want to get back to where you were, you just click Window, and then you can click Console root/diskmanagement.local, and that will bring you right back to the console root. Now, let's go ahead and we'll do the same thing for services and shared folders, and then I'll show you kind of how this works. So again, if we want to create a separate window for services, we'll right click it and we'll select New Window from here. And then to get back, we'll click Window in Console Root. Finally, I'm going to right click this, we'll do the same thing, New Window from here, and then we'll go back to Console Root. So now what we've done is we've broken these 3 snap-ins out into their own separate snap-in. And we can get there 2 ways. I'm going to just illustrate how this works. So first off, you can see here that you have some navigation controls. So the top ones here, that allows you to manage how it looks like in Windows. So you can see here we can minimize it, we can maximize it, and if we click the X we could close it. The bottom set of controls allow you to manage each one of these different sessions or different snap-ins that we just created. So let me show you what I mean by that. So let's go ahead and minimize that. And now you can see here we have our main console, which has all 3 of them. And then we've got one separate console for each one. So we created one for services, we created one for disk management, and we created one for local, or excuse me, for shared folders. An easy way to manipulate these, we can just click and drag, and we can resize these if we wanted to. I would personally like to use these options, so we can cascade them so they show up one underneath the other. We can tile them horizontally so they show up like that, so you can see all of them at once. And we can arrange the icons too. We're going to not mess with that though right now. You can always get back to where you were by clicking Window and then searching for each, or clicking the appropriate one. So let's say we want to get back to that console root we were looking at earlier that contained all three of them. You just click that and it would bring that back up. We can also minimize these. So if we just wanted to work with one, we can minimize these. They'll show up down here in the bottom tray. And then we'll maximize that one so you can see we're working with just disk management. So there's a few reasons why you'd want to do that. The main reason is, let's say you have a master management console or a master MMC that you're working with, and you want to break this out so that only specific users can have access to certain ones without having to recreate MMCs for certain things. Because again, remember, you can share these MMCs with other people. You can set it up so they only have access to specific things. So one thing I want to show you kind of on that note is, let's talk about how we can change the access level that people have to these. So right now we're in author mode, and author mode, as you'll read about in your book, allows you to basically just create these management consoles and manipulate them like you were an author. But let's say we want to share this with one of our subordinates. Like, let's say maybe I'm the boss and I want to share it with my subordinate who's going to cover me while I'm gone. So I don't want them to make changes to these management consoles that they have open, or these snap-ins they've got open. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a file, and then we'll go to options. And now you can see here in the options we have a few options. First off, we can change the name of the console, and we can also change the icon of the console to something else. Additionally, here we have console mode. So now we have author mode, which we're in. We have user mode full access, which you can see here down in this description. It prevents users from adding or removing snap-ins or changing snap-in console properties, but they have full access to the console tree, which is this stuff up here, this stuff right up here. We have user mode limited access multiple windows, which means it prevents the users from accessing areas of the tree that are not visible in the snap-in console window. So that's what I was talking about earlier, how if you don't want the user to have access to everything else in the console root here, then you would put them into user mode limited. And if you want to have them just have access to a single window and prevent the users from accessing areas of the tree that are not visible in single window snap-in console, snap-in console window, then you would save it as this. Now your book gives a more robust explanation of these, your lab is going to have you go through and play with these. But let's see what happens when I save it in user mode limited access single window. So we're going to click OK, and then we're going to do save as, and we'll save this as, I'm going to call my user Bob. So Bob's going to be able to use this MMC while I'm gone. So this window will pop up. It says you choose to display a single window interface when this console is opens in user mode, but you have more than one window open. The user can only view the currently active window. And then it's going to ask you, are you sure you want to save it like this? We're going to say yes. I'll minimize this, and then we're going to go ahead and open Bob MMC. So yeah. And now you'll notice here that we had previously created 4 of those snap-ins that we can look at, or that we can manipulate, and now we only have this one that we've got access to. So again, when we had 4, when we created our extra ones, we had some extra controls that are right up here. Those are no longer visible. You'll also notice that you are missing a few other options up here, and again, that's just because we've saved it in more of a restricted access. So that's how you go about manipulating these MMCs. That's pretty much it as far as the MMCs goes. There's a few other things that you can do such as like connect to another computer to manage that computer, but we saw that in the snap-in. Let's go ahead and close this and we'll go back to our main one here. Is there anything else I want to show you? I believe that's it. So your lab's, again, going to have you go through this a little bit more in depth, so you'll get to play around with these MMCs, but these are really useful, especially if you're working with another person. And even if you aren't working with another person, they're really useful because you can customize these to really fit what you manage. So if you manage disks and services a lot, like on one particular computer, then you might create a console that's got these snap-ins here available for you. Rather than have access to all of the snap-ins, it's easier to just have access to what you need. So, excuse me. I'm going to go ahead and close the MMC here. Actually, excuse me, no I'm not. I'm going to leave it open because we added the services snap-in, and that's what we're going to talk about next. So the services, let's talk about what services are really quick. So first off, you have applications, you've got like Internet Explorer, which has a graphical user interface, and you can use that to go browse the internet, right? But let's say you have a task or a program that doesn't really need user input. You don't need to interact with the user at all to accomplish the task that it's trying to accomplish. Well, oftentimes what they'll do is they'll create these things called services. And services are basically just applications or programs that are running in the background that the user doesn't need to interact with in order to run. Typically, these are services that the operating system needs to run in order to accomplish certain things. So, for example, we have a printer spooler service, and the printer spooler service, we'll scroll down here and we'll see what it looks like. You can see here we've got printer spooler. So basically what this does is it takes print jobs that you have, and we're going to talk in depth about how printers work in terms of Windows 7, but it's going to take, we're going to talk in depth about what printers are and how they work in a future lab slash module. But getting back to the services services thing here, so the printer spooler service, this basically just controls the printer spooler, and the spooler is this piece of application that is responsible for converting your digital document into something that can be printed. So the printer spooler service needs to run all the time in order to kind of monitor print jobs that are sent to it. So if we were to turn the printer spooler service off, we wouldn't be able to print. Now you can see here you've got a whole bunch of other options that are available, and quite frankly there's a whole bunch of them, and depending on your system, third-party applications, you can see here that Adobe has its own update service that installs itself right into the services management console. So this is, I'm not going to go over what each one of these are. It's just going to be something that you're going to kind of have to learn as you go. But what I will show you how to do is I'll show you how to manage the services that are running on your machine. So first let's talk about how to get there. So you can manage, or you can add the services MMC or the services snap into your Microsoft Management Console. You can also get there by just typing services.msc into your search bar, or even just services, and then it will pop up. So the services menu, of course, looks exactly like the MMC snap-in that we have going. There's a few other ways to get there, but I find that those are the easiest way. So first off, let's look at the column, and we'll go column by column here. So first off, we have the name of the service, and that tells you, what the service does, or it gives you a brief example, or excuse me, it gives a brief explanation as to what the service does. So for example, this service here is responsible for Bluetooth. The next column over is the description, and now this is kind of minimized usually by default, so if you wanted to read the whole description, you'd have to make this column a little bit bigger. But if you click on the service, over here in the left-hand corner, or the left-hand side of the screen, you can see a description of what the service does. So We clicked on the Bluetooth support service, and the Bluetooth support service supports directory and association of remote Bluetooth devices. Stopping or disabling this service may cause already installed Bluetooth devices to fail and operate properly. To fail to operate properly and prevent new devices from being discovered or being associated. So, in other words, it's going to disable Bluetooth if you stop that. So I mentioned that these are services that are running these are programs that are running all the time. But you'll notice here that in the status field, which tells you if the service is running or not, some of these services aren't started. They just don't have a status. And there's a reason for that, and that's because services don't have to run all the time constantly, or not every application, not every service has to run all the time constantly. We're going to talk about Windows Task Scheduler in a future module. But some of these some of these services only run at specific times. So for example, the Flash Player Update service, which is installed by Adobe, only runs when, I believe it's only when Windows starts. There's some other services here as well that don't start unless you trigger them to start. So let's say we want to start a service. Let's back up. Let's continue along with here, and then we'll talk about that later. You can also see the startup type. So there's 3 different startup types, and we'll look at that here in just a sec. Actually, let's look at it now. You'll see that there's so how I got to this menu here, each one of these services has a properties window. So we right-clicked it, and we'll talk about each one of these here in a second, but I just want to show you what the startup type is first. So we got properties, startup type, and you can see there's a couple startup types here we've got. So we'll start at the bottom. We've got disabled, which means the service is just completely disabled and won't run. We've got manual, which means that there's something has to trigger this. So either you have to go in here and trigger the service to start, or a program has to start the service for you. You've got automatic, which will start the service automatically when starting up Windows. And then you've got automatic delayed start, which will delay the start of the service until you tell it to, and that's what these start parameters are down here. Not every application can be automatic delayed start though, so keep that in mind. So I'm going to cancel out of that. So the startup type will tell you how the service is starting. So these manual ones, again, remember they have to be run manually. So you'll either have to come in here into the services.msc window and start them yourself, or an application will have to trigger them. Now it's okay to have these be manual. Again, that's just for specific applications. So if you come in here and you see a whole bunch of them like this that aren't started, don't freak out. That's probably by design. This last column here, you can see that it has it says log on as. And so what this column here is telling you is what permission level the service is running as. We're going to talk about permissions in a later module, but in a nutshell, some of these services only need access to certain things. So you set them up with certain permissions so that they have access to those things. If they don't have the correct access, or the correct permissions, then they won't be able to run correctly or like they should. So let's talk about how to start and stop services. So every once in a while, you probably heard this from time to time if you've ever been in an office or a school. IT guy comes in and says, "Oh, the service isn't running." Sometimes if these services again, remember they're programs, so sometimes they can have issues with them that cause them to stop running. And so what you'd have to do is you'd have to come in here and restart it. So that'll happen often. We'll go back to the printer spooler as an example. If the printer spooler gets like a job stuck in it, what you'll have to do is you'd have to go in. Again, we're going to talk about printers, so I'm not expecting you to remember this now, but we're going to talk. You'd go into the print spooler, you disable or delete the job that is causing the pileup with the printers, and then you'd come in here and you'd have to restart the print service in order to get those jobs to continue through. So let's say that happened. Someone came to you, they're like, "Hey, my printer's not working." They printed a whole bunch of documents and one document is stuck and causing a backup of all the print jobs. Well, all you'd have to do is come in here, you right click, stop, and that will stop the service. Then you can go back in the right-click menu, the context menu here, and then you can click Start. And then that will start the service, and you can see that right there. You also have the option of clicking Restart, and that will stop and start the service for you. Microsoft, one of the nice things that they've done is they've made it so you don't have to right-click twice. You can just click Restart. There's also another All Tasks menu here that has these options. To be honest, I'm not sure why this is here when we have this right here, but I'm sure it's there for a good reason. You also have the refresh option. Sometimes in here, if a service starts, this menu won't refresh itself to reflect the fact that it started, so you'd have to right-click and select refresh. What else can I show you? Properties. So I already showed you this menu here. So if you right-click any of these services, you can click Properties. This will show you the path to the program or the executable that's running this service. You can see here that the path to the print spooler is C Windows System 32 spooler sv.exe. This general tab just shows you some basic information, most of which you can pull from this list here. So it's a spooler. It displays its name as the print spooler. This description field tells you what it does. Down here you've got start parameters. Now remember last week how we had looked at the command line, and we had talked about how the command line is the graphical user interface is basically just a front end for the command line, and the command line is really what's doing all the heavy lifting in the background. You just don't see it because you have the graphical user interface. So again, you'd have to run spooler sv.exe to start the spooler service, but you could also give it some start parameters, which means when it starts up, it behaves in a slightly different way. So you can do that for any one of these services. You just have to play around with it and see what kind of parameters you've got going on. Generally, you don't need to change these though. Log on here. So this tells you what credentials this will log on with. So local system account, that's typically what you want to leave these at, and leave it at default. But you can click this account, and then you can set which account or which user account your machine will use to run this. So I mean, you could set this to run this as yourself, you could set it to run it as administrator, so on and so forth. Typically just leave it as a local system account unless you have a reason to come in here and change this. Recovery, this one's really helpful. So I mentioned that these services are programs and programs can crash inherently, this will go ahead and will restart the service for you or attempt to do that. So you can see here, first failure, restart the service, second failure, restart the service. Anything after that, don't take an action. So you can set up to you can set pretty much unlimited failures after this if you set restart the service here. You have a few options in here, so you can select take no action, which means it won't try to restart anything. You can say restart the service, which means it will again try to restart the service. You can say run a program, which this is really helpful. Let's say you have a application that is really critical to your business and it runs itself as a service, and you want to know when the service starts, or excuse me, when the service stops. You can select run a program, and then in the program field here, you can with the proper command line parameters here, you can set it up so that it will email you and alert you that this service has stopped. So that's a really helpful thing that you can do. And finally, you can tell it to restart the computer. Now I'd use this option sparingly, only select it if you really have a need to. But other than that, that's pretty much the recovery option. So I'm going to go ahead and go over to dependencies. So this one's also really important to know. Some of these services require you to require other services to run. So for example, this print spooler service, it tells you here that the service depends on the following components, which means that if HTTP service and remote procedure call service aren't running, then the print spooler service won't run. This also tells you which services depend on it. So if your print spooler isn't running, then this fax service isn't running. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And that's pretty much the services menu here. What I'd suggest is go around and play with these services here, and just start and stop a few and see if what it does, maybe what breaks if you've got yourself a nice testing environment, and just generally play around with these. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize that. So we talked about MMCs, we talked about services. Now let's talk about the registry. So the registry is basically a location where programs will save some of their temporary and semi-permanent, where they'll save some of the settings and temporary configuration settings. So when people write programs, they have to create references to different locations and places and settings on your operating system, and the registry is a convenient place for them to store all of those settings. So I'll show you what I mean here. First, the thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the registry. Now the easiest way to get there is to go search, start, and then go to search and type regedit, R-E-G-E-D-I-T. Excuse me, R-E-G-E-D-I-T. And then we'll hit OK. We'll select yes. And I'm going to go ahead and we'll show you what it looks like when you first open it. So the registry here, it is separated into 5 different kind of like root keys or root folders here that we can look at. So the registry is just basically a big database that contains a bunch of settings that the operating system and programs can refer to. And I'll show you what that means here in a second. Now, the first thing I want to warn you about here is that the registry is a very dangerous place. A lot of applications and a lot of the operating system files refer to the registry. So if you make changes to the registry, make sure that you back it up first. And I'm going to show you how to do that here in a second. Because if you were to just go through here and start deleting random keys, then a bunch of your applications wouldn't work, and you'd have to go either restore from a backup or reinstall your OS. So make sure that you back up your registry beforehand. So the registry has 5 different root keys here. Each one of these root keys has a different function or a different category of settings that are set in it. Your book is going to give you a really robust explanation, so I suggest reading that. And then these keys, these folders here, underneath them have a bunch of other folders. So you can see here that I click the arrow to expand that, and that expanded a bunch of other folders here. And you can see what I mean by there's a lot of things that are referenced here in the registry, and it's not just your operating system; it's your programs too. So and then underneath those, you've got other folders as well. And then underneath those, you've got other folders as well. So much like the file system in Windows, it's hierarchical, which means that it has some root levels, and then it's got folders underneath that and folders underneath that. So let me show you an example of one way that you can use the registry. Now, again, use the registry very sparingly. Typically, I would only recommend going into the registry if you have a special need to. Some fix is a registry key only fix, or some program requires a registry edit. Just make sure that you're very careful when you go in here. So what I did here is I set myself a favorite. So I'm going to go ahead and go to send to. And let me show you what I'm going to edit. So when I right click here, I'm just going to right click this Microsoft Management Console. You can see here that I got this context menu that opens up. And one of the items in here is send to. And you can see here that it has a whole bunch of different options in here that I can look at, but I don't care about those right now. So if I want to, let's say I want to remove this function, the send to feature. So I found the registry key for send to. And in here, I just go over this one at a time. So I've got registry key. I've got the name of the key. This one just happens to be default. This is the key type. And then this is the data that the registry key is holding. So if you double click this allows you to edit what type of data is in there. So you can see here that this is a really big long string that the operating system probably uses. I'm going to go ahead and just click, actually let me back up. So before I do this, what I want to do is I want to back up this specific registry key. So to do that, I'm going to right click it, and then I'm going to click export. And then from there, I'm going to choose where I want to export it to. I'm going to just save it to my desktop. So we'll save it as an you can save this as an arbitrary name. I like to save it as whatever the registry key was that I'm changing. So I'll do send to, and I'll click save. Now you can see I've got send2.reg here on my desktop. So if I wanted to, so I backed it up. So that means that this registry key has been backed up to my desktop. So in the event that I mess something up, I can simply just double click this, and I'll show you how to do this here in a second, and restore the change, or restore to a state prior to the change that I made. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in here into this default setting, and then I'm going to click delete, or I'm going to select that whole thing and then hit delete. I'm going to click OK. So now you can see here that there's nothing, there's no data here in this registry key. And this is a good example here. Again, the registry is a very dangerous place, and one of the reasons it's a dangerous place is because it doesn't validate any of the changes that you make. So you could potentially put anything into that data field and save it, and then Windows would take it. But just because it was able to save it doesn't mean you can do anything with it. So again, it's really important that you're backing up these keys, because as you saw, there was a big long string in there, and there's no way I'd remember what that string was without having to go back and look at it or restore from a previous setting. So make sure you're backing up. So now, just as proof of concept here, I'm going to right click, and now you can see that there's no more send to context menu. And again, I didn't do any sort of like file save as, I didn't do any sort of like Control S to save this. This just happened right away. So you could imagine that if you were to go in here and delete stuff, there's no check to make sure that what you're deleting isn't being used, so stuff just wouldn't work. So make sure, again, you're backing up. I can't stress that enough. I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but make sure you're backing up your registry keys. So remember how I said, oh, well, I'm never going to remember what's in there. Well, since I backed it up, all I have to do is double click this, and then I'm going to say yes. And it's going to ask me if I really want to input this registry key back into my registry. And since we know that this is from a trusted source because we just created this, I'm going to select yes. And then it's going to tell you whether or not it was successful in adding that key to the registry. So we were successful. I'm going to click OK. And you can see here that that registry key populated itself again. And then just to prove it, I can right click, and the send to menu is back. So that's, in a nutshell, just a really quick way to use the registry to edit things. Now again, there's lots of settings in here, as you'll see. If you've got a virtual machine to play with that you don't mind breaking a little bit, you could go in here and play with these, but in general, I'd keep out of the registry unless there is some specific need for you to go in here and make a change. And then again, make sure you're backing it up. One thing I want to show you too really quick, you can back up the registry, the whole registry if you wanted to. Oh, sorry, wrong thing. Regedit. You could potentially back up the whole registry to a single .reg file if you wanted to, by just right-clicking computer and selecting export. Now keep in mind that this is going to be, I think it's about 400 megabytes of data, so it's going to take a long time to back up the entire registry, and it will take a while to restore it. And by a long time, I mean maybe 5 minutes or so. And then if you want to restore it, again, just double click that file that we're going to create, or that we created with the backup, and then it would restore that for you. You can also do what's called a Windows shadow copy of this, and we'll go over different backup schemes here in a future module, but there's another way you can back the registry up as well, and I'll explain that a little bit later. But tonight, again, we covered the Microsoft Management Console, we covered services and how you can manage those, and we covered the registry. Your homework this week basically just goes over the Microsoft Management Console, and then the rest of the chapter, again, it goes over a lot of the different components that you'll find in the Start menu and the Control Panel. I highly encourage you to go through this week and go through each one of these Control Panel options. I know there's a lot of them, but it's worth it to just go through and see what they do. at least familiarize yourself a little bit with some of these, play around with them, see if you can figure out what they do. And then a lot of these options here, especially like the networking sharing center, home group, things like that, we're going to go over more in depth as the term progresses. So just keep that in your back pocket, but play around with these this week. And if you have any questions, of course, post them to the discussion board, and I will see you guys next week.